जी, please start, sir.
Okay. So, very good morning to my colleagues from RC and Tejpal ji, and also our learners who have just now joined us. I hope I am audible, and if there is any issue, please let me know. Uh, Sneha, am I audible?
Good morning, sir. Yes, yes, you are very audible. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome to this session.
Thank you, sir.
So, I will take a small note of yesterday's proceedings because that is what our convention is, that when we begin our new session, then we slightly link up this with our previous discussion that we usually had on the previous occasion. So, yesterday we discussed block 2, which was the structure of material. So, the structure of material is not very technical that way because it deals with the uh, how does the material comes into the imagination. So that was the genesis of the theme, where and how does it occur, and then we discussed within this particular unit that there is a creative impulse, there is experience, there is long cherished desire, there is nostalgia. So all this basically gives rise to an impulse, and it's become genesis of theme. Then we get some theme to write upon. Uh, I'm sorry, today we are having a very heavy rain, so the clouds are thundering. So if there is any disturbance, please excuse me. Uh, So then we also discussed a very important issue yesterday. That was the when we talk about the structure, very first thing in a structure is the idea or the theme. So it is the result of an kind of commotion, kind of struggle within one's very inner understanding, consciousness, and then the experiences at the innermost part of the human beings that emanates and become a kind of theme and idea for developing into the writing. We also discussed about the opening of our writing, opening of the writing. How do we begin with writing? So, very simple hint that was we discussed yesterday was very funny though, but the factual one, that we should not shirk from the false starts. So, though it looks that our start is false, but obviously it is not failure. I think this one uh, aspect has to be kept in mind, that if we do not write perfectly in the beginning, that does not mean we have failed. This is very important cue. So what it means is that, and almost all major, all luminaries, all acclaimed authors, writers, celebrities, at the beginning, all of them have different experiences. They, when you speak to them, and when they share their kind of views of becoming a writer, they will always give you very funny stories. How did they become writer? So some coincidence, some turning points, some things, and some people struggled very hard, and then ultimately they achieved the status of the good writer or good author. So it doesn't come in a day. It comes after practice, hard work of many years, intense exercise, reading, listening, discussing. Even then, in the beginning, everyone has some kind of gaps in writing, some kinds of deficiencies in writing. So that should not be taken as a failure. So that is very good phrase that the false starts. So it gives very positive feeling actually that if there is something which is not very perfect, which might be having some scope for discussion, criticism, some senior writers might find some faults with our writing. That should not be taken by the budding writer as a negative feedback. Rather, it should be positive feedback because that will help oneself to grow and gather different experiences and then develop them into writing. When we discuss the next phase of the structure of material, that was the uh, climax. Because after we have opened up, that means we have begin this writing. Then we try to go through various stages and bring a point where the learners, the readers' experiences, readers' perplexities, readers' dichotomies, confusions are all sort of uh, exposed. They become very transparent. They become very clear, and a kind of joy seemingly the knitting from the writings becomes very intense. So, this intensity of experience that is gained through the writings is the climax. So, the climax is basically it's a kind of happening, you know, and this happening is in the writings. So, climax is also not a state of confusion because it is a state where all confusions or perplexities, all that the writers conveyed in the beginning, in the middle, which led the imagination of the readers to various directions. So when the climax takes place, it happens. All those are sorted out, resolved. So there nothing else but the intense pleasure of reading prevails. Yesterday we also discussed the ending, so that was quite interesting discussion. Different types of endings are there. We have formula writings, we have the investigative writings, we have uh, different writings, and each one of them will have a different ending. So sometimes there is a unique or the single idea ending. Sometimes we have a kind of very transparent ending, very mathematically precision ending, where the writer very categorically clears all the doubts, especially in the investigative theories, the stories. We know that there are a lot of directions in which the reader's mind uh, wanders while reading the story, but when the author makes it clear in the end, then there is no doubt. I mean, there is no possibility of iota of doubt in the investigative story. Uh, but in formula stories, we have different ending. There can be happy ending, there can be sad ending, and in some stories there is a different type of ending. Say, for example, if a story is based on human sufferings, migration, separation, then there is a different type of ending. So all these are there. Yesterday we also discussed one very important point that where from the inspiration uh, is gained for our imagination. So sometimes we know that it is a situation, it is an experience, it is a kind of happening that gives us that gives us scope, or that rather compels us to imagine some kind of situation. But there are certain different types of situations, say, for example, political and social uh, situations. The motivation comes from the social or the political situation. Just like if there is an unrest, there is a movement, there is a strike, and if something that occurs to a budding author, budding writer, and if it is developed, then that is a different type of writing, which is the source of which is basically the social and political motivation. So, as I mentioned, I use the word the situation. So, the situation is basically very important in any form of writing. Even I was reading that says situation to a writing is that what flour is for the uh, bread. So situation is so this, it means that situation is the only basis is the situation for any writing. So if there isn't situation, there isn't writing. So if there isn't situation, there isn't writing. That is not possible. So it was just simile that situation is to write. Situation is writing to what flour is to bread. So if we don't have a flour, we cannot imagine the bread. सो अगर आटा ही नहीं होगा तो रोटी कहाँ से बनेगी. तो इसी तरह से अगर कोई सिचुएशन नहीं होगी तो हमारे लेखन के लिए कोई आधार हमें नहीं मिलेगा. We won't have any basis for writing until or unless we have a situation. So the best example of situation is the Valmiki. Valmiki's Ramayana. All of us have read that while looking at the killing of a bird by the hunter, you know, that was not very intended or intentional looking at, but just mm, like a passersby, Valmiki accidentally saw the hunter killing bird, and then he also saw the pangs of separation suffered by the partner, and all this, led the great author Valmiki to write an epic that is there, which is Ramayana. So it is one such example that states how important the situation is to a writing. So we have to, give due importance to situation. This is very important. Uh, uh, you see, we have to also understand that the choice of situation is the writer's own domain. The writer can write uh, by a situation which he or she might have witnessed long ago, or they might be just witnessing it sometimes spontaneously, because we discussed that there are a series of experiences which are there within our imagination, within our hearts. So when we club couple of experiences, we rather have an idea, and that idea then gets developed into writing. So the situation, the choice of situation is the writer's domain. A writer can take the situation from newspapers. Lot of stories are published in the newspapers. Lot of scope is there for discussion, for introspection. Uh, we can we also watch a lot of things happening in our day-to-day life. So we have our own experiences in our world behavior. So we can also take a situation from there. So there is in particularly in Indian lifestyle, it's very our lifestyle is very complex yet very simple, but it has a multiplicity of moods, activities. We have very typical relationships, and then we have very different family or the social norms for family. So all this gives the we have taboos, we have different relationships, we have different kinship terms. We are related in any number of ways. Somebody is related to somebody in a very strange kind of thing when we go into deeper into our kinship relationships. All this gives an opportunity to the budding author, any writer, to look into these relationships. How do they develop socially? How do they develop, in the uh, culturally? So our culture, Indian society, despite having certain taboos, the taboos itself is a great situation for writing. Of course, when you talk about taboos, one has to be very rational, and one has to go into those reasons. So there is a scope for investigative writing. Also, when one goes through the facts and reaches at the bottom of the truth, and then he or she develops a writing on that basis. So it is interesting that the situation is very, very important. So a situation is the basis of writing. So if there is, if whatever situation is there, then, and also it hits our imagination, because Valmiki, perhaps everyone of us, or all of us, or some of us definitely have seen situations which were very, very pathetic, very, very painful, very, very uh, full of anguishness. But we didn't write, we didn't create an epic like Ramayana. So it is also important that the person should be Sarida. Sarida means full of compassion, full of pity, and above all, uh, one must have a deep concern for humanity or for human values. So only that person, when it comes across accident intently or unintentionally, then there is possibility that a kind of epic, a kind of glorious work will come into uh, rise or will come into shape. So what happens, sometimes what we do is we group our experiences. What so grouping of experiences is basically a mix of uh, happy and unhappy experiences. Sometimes we see that if two people are there, they love each other. So this is when the romance begins. It is a happy time. But when there is a separation, when both of them have differences, a lot of things do happen. That part is the unhappy part. So if we put two together, happiness, sorrow, depression, uh, hopefulness, optimism. So all this mix of all these things actually becomes a very conducive situation for writing. So all this actually makes or prepare a kind of situation for writing. So very importantly, the literary work is such this mix of situation, or rather intensive feelings of a person, cannot be handled in any other writing but creative writing. So the literary work related to uh, creative writing or literariness is a great tool, great handle to deal with the different moods of person, different experiences that may be happy or unhappy. There are certain other situations which also become a very important basis for writing. Sometimes somebody is punished. I'm not talking about punishment in the classroom or in the school or in the college, but we know in life there is a whole lot of range by which we see the punishment. Sometimes there is intimidation, sometimes there is treachery against a person, sometimes there is a conspiracy against a person, against a society, against a culture, against a nation. So there are a lot of situations which then all those situations also become basis for writing. So those can be developed into if those are taken for a theme, then they can be developed into a full or a complete writing. Situations basically there are two types of situations if you talk about the broad classification of situations. So there are certain situations which are human interest situations. Human interest situations. These are basically those situations where the individual or a person who is a Saridai. Saridai means a person who can relish the lesser. He or she is uh, called Saridai. It is very easy for a Saridai person to, to have the intensity in through the situation and then develop it into a theme, and the theme will go on becoming a writing. There is also a kind of situation which is one is human related, human interest situation. The second one is the situation which needs lot of interpretation. Sometimes there are stories, there are poetry. There is a poetry which is based on computer, how computer works. No? So there is a whole range of poetry on it. At the same time, there are a lot of stories written about which about the theme related to computers. So, but when you talk about when you write about that, then the treatment part will be very very descriptive because all the concepts that these technical subjects will have, those cannot be simply discussed by naming them. So the author has to explain their functions, their processes, their technicalities, and all. So if somebody is uh, writing a fiction about the robot, then uh, the robot technology will have also to be clarified. What I'm trying to say is that there is human interest, and it's human interest because it relates to each one of us. That is easier to. It doesn't require much explanation, but then if it is requiring a lot of explanations, that goes into science fiction, technical writings, and so forth. Only thing in our situation that we think that this situation is going to be basis for my writing. one has to be very realistic. What is meant by becoming or being realistic? Realistic not about the situation, but realistic about one own one's own ability, one's own capacity, one's own competence, power, and potential. Because it's not possible that anybody or all of us can write on certain scientific themes. Only those who have studied science but have creative minds can write science fiction. Perhaps others might also be writing, but then their writings will not be that useful as of a person who belongs to that area, to that theme, and having imaginary mind, creative mind. So it is very important that one has to be very, very realistic about one's own capabilities, interest. Very importantly, is the interest. If it is not area of interest, obviously one would not progress. One would not attain the heights until and unless one is die hard into that writing. So this is very important. So as I mentioned just now, that newspapers are also one good source of situations, and a lot of good, bad, financial, sports, investigative stories, murders. I mean, it is full of such writings which can give very useful, very probable situation for writing. So it is suggested that in the beginning, instead of going into writing of novel or perhaps poetry, better that one begins with writing short stories or one act play. So one act play is also a very important area in the writing of plays. When we talk about drama, then one act play has a very specific role. This would mean that one will not be having, not one need not to take trouble of writing a very long composition. One can simply write maybe 2 pages or at the most 3 pages, and you can bring in the dialogic forms, and will have maybe not too many but 3 4 characters, so that is a little easier, and day-to-day experiences, day-to-day situations can be very easily put into the dialogues, into the dialogues, as well as can be expressed, narrativized by through the different characters. One has to choose the characters, of course, carefully. So it is found little easier. Uh, we also have to be very careful about one particular thing. This particular issue is about the uh, intensity of the feelings. So not all the intense feelings are very useful for writing, because the felt experiences might sometimes be very intense, very powerful. But when one comes then to writing upon those feelings, I hope I am clear now. Feelings I meant to say the situation. So the health situations, health experiences may not always be good uh, basis for writing, because when one puts down into writing the ideas, the situations, it is very difficult, sometimes, because our health experiences can be very very individualistic. Say for example, if we see a situation in bazaar where somebody is selling the caged birds. So, and someone is trimming the wings of the birds. Somebody will very very will deeply hurt by looking at the plight, at the tragic uh, tragic situation in which the birds have been kept. But then somebody else might not be having the same intensity of experience. If someone likes to have the birds, mm, to keep birds in one's house, she will go buy a cage with a bird and bring back to the house and then put them as a showpiece. Though it is not uh, human, it is little inhuman because no living being should be caged. But what I'm trying to say is that different people have different felt experience of a situation. So we always cannot consider that yes, this particular situation will be ideal and will be appreciated by not only myself but everybody. So we cannot include everyone there. That means we cannot expect every reader to be touched in the same intensive way as the author was. But of course, one can write, but one has to be very careful. Uh, the second thing, the point here is, which I wanted to make it, that the interpersonal relationship with the reader of the author is to be judged by the validation of the author's feeling, because sometimes we have impulsive mm, felt experience that is not validated by the reader's judgment. So if it is not validated means if it is not appreciated or rather taken rationally by the reader, then that means our felt experience was not a very appropriate theme, very appropriate mm, experience or a very appropriate situation for writing. So these are few points, and if one keeps in mind what is situation, how situation works for providing a basis, and what are the precautions that one should not take any situation to be final. Situation means felt experience of an individual. So one has to see the validation of one's health situation by the readers. This is very important. Finally, just a small addition to our discussion on situation. That there is also a question of language. What kind of language should be used? So perhaps we are talking about a budding author. So I'm sure they are conscious about the language. If it is a melodrama, they have to use the language accordingly. If it is a dialogue, discussing a rural situation, hinterlands, a kind of ethnic groups, tribal communities, then the language has to be such as to be spoken and appropriate to be spoken by that particular society group of people. If it is about the scientists, say for example, if it is a science fiction and a community of scientists is there and talking to each other in a dialogic form, then the language has to be like that. what I'm trying to say is that the language part is not or cannot be prescripted uniformly for everybody. This it has to be decided uh, by the author, by the writer himself or herself, as per the situation. Uh, uh, I am sure the situation uh, that we were talking about as a basis for discussion, this is clear. So we'll now move to another part, another point of our discussion today. And this is a very interesting discussion. The discussion is about the how do we present, how do we make idea clear to the readers when we progress, when we move forward with the theme, with the development of the theme. So then one very important issue comes how to present the idea. So either there are only two ways to present the idea. Either there is a dialogue or there is a monologue. Either there is dialogue or there is monologue. So I think you are already aware what is dialogue and what is monologue. So dialogue is when two or more people are participating in making of the conversation or in a written text, in a written, say for example, a story or novel or any other form of fiction. If there are two or more people, then that becomes a dialogue. But if only one person is there and narrating things like in autobiographies, then that situation indicates the situation of monologues. So only these are the two. Even very interestingly, one can ask a question: how does it work in the poetry? Sometimes in the poetry also, little Johnny, like this. We have small characters, uh, and then John embarked uh, quite as he was, and like this. So there is also a situation where we will talk about it in a little while. So what we are to discuss is that if the dialogues, and it is very important that the dialogues and monologues, these are used very skillfully, because if they are used very skillfully, then well, not only that the plot will be dealt properly or the situation will be developed properly, but it will also move smoothly, because the dialogues, if those are very skillfully crafted, then it will kind of flow. It will kind of read, smoothly. So this is the usefulness of very intelligently created dialogues. The dialogues are also, very important in a story, in composition, to keep the central idea alive. Because by taking cues from here and there, one or the other character will always, keeps on reminding that yes, this was our basic theme. We are talking about different experiences, but at the center of that, the very uh, uh, situation which we now. I am not talking about plot. I am not talking about basis. I am talking about situation. So that situation must be there, because if this situation is ignored, then the writing becomes a fallacy. It will just fall, it will just crumble like a house of cards. So this is very important, that whether it is dialogue or monologue, it has to be crafted very skillfully, because not that it will allow mm, the situation to be developed smoothly, but it will also be very important to reveal the truth. Sometimes there are eternal truth, and if someone, some character is ignoring that very basic theme, then the other can remind through the dialogues and the monologue, and makes the it, basically it is said that the dialogues and the monologues helps us to make the truth clear. That means making the truth clear means that it keeps the situation or the main theme alive all through the composition or writing or creation of the poetry. Now there is a uh, discussion about the uh, dialogues. See, very interestingly, the dialogues are there is a dramatization of ideas. The dialogues is important too important in dramatizing the ideas. Uh, what do we do while we present the dialogues or while writing the dialogues? What the writer does or the author does? He or she doesn't do anything else other than dramatizing the ideas. Somebody wants to say, yes, today we will not be able to go for a walk. So one person will say, oh, the sky is overcast today. Somebody then say, okay, then we can't do anything, so let us have a cup of tea. What is the relationship between one person saying, oh, the sky is overcast, and then the other person, okay, fine, that is all right. The other person say, oh, then let us have a cup of tea. So that is the dramatization of ideas. The idea is to say that we will not be able to go for a walk, but nobody is talking about the walk. One person talks about the sky, other person talks about having a cup of tea. How the message is conveyed that we will not be able to go for a walk. This is the dramatization of idea. So basic idea was that there will not be possibility to go for a walk. So this is the dramatization of idea. So the more skillful the author is, the more crafting an author is, the more smooth expression of message will there be. This is very important. So now let us come to the dramatization of or dramatized dialogue in fiction, or the dramatization of ideas through dialogues in fiction. So in fiction, how the ideas are dramatized through the dialogues. So, you see, one person speaks something, then other person poses a question. For example, Rosie wanted to go away from here. Rosie wanted to go away from here. Sham could not answer why she wants to go. Rohtas, why? He doesn't say who is wanting to go, what was the reason, But then the whole situation becomes very clear. As I gave small example, one character says the sky is overcast. The other character says, let us have a cup of tea. If there is a third character can say, but why? Then the fourth person can say, because it is likely to rain very heavily. Now you see how the idea has been dramatized. Nobody is saying clearly what is the idea. So everybody is putting the idea into a kind of dramatization, and it is being clearly understood by all the four characters who is saying what, who is responding in which way. So this is the dramatization of ideas through fiction, through the dialogue in the fiction. Uh, so there is a dramatization of ideas in the through dialogue in the poetry also. Uh, there are a lot of characters in a number of pieces of poetry which are talking. Either they are talking to themselves or they are talking to the other. Or uh, ideally, they are talking to readers. If someone says, "Tell me what happened. Did you tease him?" Me teasing him? No, 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 no. That freak climbed the hill. Oh, you couldn't do then what you thought. Oh, not enough, though I did try. Hmm, very, very mature. Then your aggression must not have ended. Of course not. John intervenes. Let us not get too fussy about this. Come, enjoy the ice cream. It will melt. Look at this small piece. Okay, so somebody is saying that this is all there in the LMS. So, would you like to discuss something else on this part? Dramatization of ideas through dialogue in poetry. So, maybe you can take a more clear view. You can discuss, read in detail. So, similarly, there is also dramatic dialogues in drama. Of course, the uh, drama is one such genre which is having a very important role of dialogues in it. It has characters, it has situation, it has the audience, and it has the uh, dialogues. So we always see there are different characters which are speaking, which are presenting an idea, and they are putting the idea through either in through the questions, through the narratives. They may be uh, interrogative narratives. They may be simple submissions, or they may be exclamatory uh, words or something or like that. So I think this can be very detailed description is given in the LMS. That means it can be. But one interesting aspect is that even in the news reports, we see the dramatization of ideas. We sometimes we don't see very straightforward news. Uh, there is also a question answer. There is also a presentation style of the news. Sometimes, like if news is being presented, and if there is new information coming in, how did it happen? It happened like this, and the source was so and so. The source did not identify because the identity cannot be revealed because of security reasons, like that. But still, where the bodies were found, where the case was detected. So there is a dramatization of ideas in the news reports also, because only then it becomes more interesting and the monotony is removed. The only thing with the dramatization of ideas, in whether it is poetry or it is story or it is news reporting or any other genre, any other writing, then what happens in it? The real personality of the speaker is reflected through the dialogues. If the dialogues are very refined, that means the character must be well educated. If there is a rusticity, that will show the character's background. If the dialogues are in more of language which is used in trade and commerce, share bazaar, like that, so then the language will be like that only, and it will reveal the identity of the speaker. So all this can be, very easily ascertained as to what is the background of the speaker. So sometimes you might have seen there are certain characters, those who do speak differently. That is one strategy. We have the clown speaking very differently from the nature of the character. There is memes, there is a mimicry. So that is also one thing which we call characters speaking uncharacteristically. Those characters, they are not supposed to speak the way they speak. So that is basically to entertain the audience. Specifically in dramas, we see this quite often. So the only advantage of the dramatization of ideas is that it helps to, you know, uh, identify the themes, as I mentioned just now, that it helps to keep the theme in view all the times, and it also brings about the situation immediately. Means one, that it keeps the situation alive throughout the composition. Secondly, it since it keeps the situation alive, so it immediately brings into notice the theme, and also the readers, they become rather they are attuned into the atmosphere in which the composition has been created. That means if it is an emotional one, so if the dialogues are skillfully crafted, they are very smooth, they clearly express, they, they are well crafted, then the reader will, become one with the pleasure, with the joy of the reading. So that means the reader will join the authors. So that is very important. When there is universalization of the reader as well as the author, then that is the best outcome of writing. Similarly, if this was about the dialogues, so we know the monologues. So the monologues are equally important, because if you look at any composition, any writing, then there will be dialogues, but at the same time, at some or the other point of the composition or the writing, we will find that there is a person speaking to oneself, uh, thinking about oneself, introspecting oneself. So it is said that the monologues are inevitable to any composition, be it poetry or poem, be it drama, or if it is short story, there will be monologue. But more importantly, uh, monologue is not just one device to explain what to explain the situation of writing. That means to explain the main basis, or rather, we can use the word plot for a short story. But it is also important uh, as it is necessary to make the composition speak to the reader. Because if that doesn't happen, the reader will be isolated. So, when there is a monologue, when either one person is speaking, one person is expressing, one person is introspecting, having a thought process, uh, in that thought process, the reader also joins. So, apart from being a literary device to explain the to situation of the composition, it also takes the story uh, ahead, and also it helps the composition to make to make a dialogue, or to make contact with the reader. So reader and the author both are becoming one if there is a very smooth writings, smooth composition, having the monologue mode. So this was all about the monologue and dialogues. Dialogues are basically, we have seen that if we see the classical Sanskrit dramas specifically written by Kalidas, or the English dramas like written by Shakespeare and others, we can see how refined the dialogues are. So, very skillfully crafted dialogues uh, in the dramatization of ideas are very important to place to any short story, or even sometimes in the poetry also there is a form, there is a dialogic form. Dialogues, another point is that dialogues are very deeply rooted in the situation. If there are no dialogues, it is very difficult to represent or to present the situation. Situation, I think now is clear what we are talking about. The situation. Situation is that what is felt experience of the author or the writer. So it is very difficult to make it clear if there are no dialogues, if there is no monologue. Because in a monologue also that situation is spoken by one to oneself and also to the reader. So monologue is basically in inhabitable utterance of character in a particular situation. So if say for example one is anguish, then there will be a different kind of utterance to oneself. If one is in a very somber mood, it will be different. If one is in a very joyous mood, then the utterances will be different. How it is possible? It is possible only when either two or more people speak to each other, one another, or one person speak either to the reader. Is this reader is not reader is imagined reader, but sometimes one person is talking about something to one's own self, and in fact he or she is talking to the reader. So this is the importance of the uh, monologues and dialogues. So we will now go to one small discussion, and this is about the uh, ending. This is a this is an interesting discussion. It will be dealing with the ambiguity and suspense. Ambiguity and suspense. I think this is one topic which is always there in the uh, discussion. In poetry, we always see that mm, there is the in the end the reader is left to decide as to what one feels from the reading. But sometimes it is not the case with the stories. It is not case with the fictional writing. So we will discuss a point which is the I think first I will discuss the ambiguity and suspense, and then we will read the readability. We will discuss the readability also in a little while. Just let us discuss the imagery and symbols. So we will discuss because we are now in the discussion of poetry. So in poetry, the very important aspects that is played by the imagery and symbols. So imagery, all of us know that it is the imagery is or imagination is the capacity of the author which lies in one's heart to create relationship with things. One can create relationship with any object that is there in the nature, in our surroundings. So it is basically an image or a kind of word picture. It may not be very real. It's a word picture. So it is a very clever use of words by the author or the poet, and through that a kind of net is woven where we imagine something. So it's a word picture in a way. Uh, Sometimes the poetry is such that strikes, with the speed of lightning, with a very current. It gives us very sensational feeling or a kind of illuminatory feeling, which is only through the words, but it is not to be seen. So it is an imagination. It is the relationship with the things that is created by the author in the poetry. So we know that we think of person's face like moon, like stars. Then we imagine a lot of other things. So those are not very real, but those. Uh, but the capacity of the author is such that he, installs a relationship between that very object and the person whom one is talking about. So it's a basically very precise and clear relationship cannot be established because it is not in a way picture which is made out of facts, but a picture made out of imagination. So it is that way a kind of imaginary situation, imaginary comparison, and it is to heighten the, you it is to bring about an extreme climax of reading through the word picture to the reader. So it's not essentially imagery is not essentially a visual picture. So the poetry writer, author, may he uses a lot of poetical devices, uses metaphors, similes, epithets, and other devices, that appeal to our senses. What are our senses? Uh, our sight, our smelling capacity, our touching sensation, our the words which creates ripples in our minds. So the hearing, sight, smell, taste, touch, or hearing. So all these are our senses. Whatever appeals to them, sometimes we say soft like the wool, soft like the merino wool. So our skin cannot be soft like the merino wools, which is the wool of a particular variety of hair. But it is a simile is given. But because we like to have that kind of touch, it is our sense of touch that, and it is the sensation is taken by the skin. So the sense of touch is lying with the skin. Sense of hearing lies with the ear. Sense of seeing lies with the eyes. Sense of sight is also with the eyes. Sense of smelling is with the nose. So sense of taste is with our tongue. So whatever appeals to these five organs of five senses, sense organs. The poet brings about similes, metaphors, he uses a lot of poetical devices to bring about joy, to bring about intensity to these senses. So, if we look at the role of images, or how does the imagery functions, it functions through the heightened sense, heightened intensity of the sense. So it is basically the concentration of, it brings about not only intensity in the sensual sense, but also it is the concentration of greatest meaning in few words. Poetry is what brings joy, pleasure in few words. So it is the concentration of words in such a way, in such a formation, that very small number of words brings a very intense, very concentrated uh, meaning, which gives joy, which gives satisfaction to ourselves. So, and the pattern is such that a lot of images are interrelated within few words. So there will be a character, a person, there will be sun, there will be moon, there will be stars. All sorts of changes within the skies that are taking place are narrated through very few words. So this is what the imagery does. So in specifically in poetry, the imagery has a great role to play. Sometimes the imagery also works uh, with phrases, idioms also. So we use a very uh, typical set of words that brings the word meaning is different, but the meaning that it brings is altogether a different meaning. So imagery also plays, apart from poetry, it also plays very important role in the idioms and phrases. Uh, it, it also uh, sort of brings amalgamation of lot of our emotions, lot of memories, diverse memories, it puts them together and brings about a different intense meaning, which gives pleasure to the readers. So in poetry, we can always realize that. Similarly, there are symbols. So uh, while imagery is basically a literary device which uses the senses to bring about pleasure, joy through very few words, and culminates in about a very intense and concentrated greatest meaning on the very few words. But if we talk about, while we talk about the symbols, so symbols are basically objects. If a face is this through simile compared with the moon, so then the moon is the object. So we use actions and gestures, to be symbolic. Sometimes we show a fist. That means we are in aggression. Sometimes we raise our arms. Then we say we have surrendered or we want peace. So if showing a fist is indicating the anger, so the fist is the object. If we raise our arms and denote surrender or peace, then that is the symbol. So raising of arms is the indicative of peace, and that is the symbol. So raising of arms is one symbol which denotes peace. The role of symbols is very simple. Um, we will come back to our initial point again. The point was the uh, experience, and also the basis upon which the uh, writings are built. So, whatever experiences we have, whatever feelings we have, with that we create a situation. So, symbols are helpful to interpret a theme. For example, if there is a situation which is fighting between two groups, then one would showing the fists, the others will get the message that yes, the other group is in aggression. But how is that conveyed? So the fist is there acting as a symbol. So that means the fist is one object which helps to interpret the theme. Secondly, uh, it is while it is interpreting the theme, it also make it acceptable. It also makes it acceptable because if somebody has seen fists, like a fist fight at certain point of time, then what would remember that, oh yeah, it hits, it really expresses the aggression. So it helps to make it acceptable. And the third point is it arouses the sense of domination or the suppression. The person who is showing the fists to another person or another group of people, then the other group which is seeing the fists being shown by the opposite group will automatically gets a message that, oh yeah, the person is in aggression, in anger. So this anger, this aggression automatically becomes a dominating factor to the author. So symbols are used in many ways, and symbols are also embellishments. They are also embellishments. Sometimes, if certain other symbols are used, those which are there in the Shringar Rasa, if we talk about this Sanskrit poetics, then they become embellishments of the composition. So symbols functions quite differently. Sometimes they narrate the concrete reality. Sometimes they heightened the meaning, specifically in short story or in a novel. These symbols provides the readers uh, with different ideas as can be associated with different objects which are symbolized. The objects which are symbolized. Say, for example, if you are talking about the fist, if you are talking about the raised arms, then there are a number of meanings, there are a number of interpretations. So the symbol helps to have the different understandings, different meanings, maybe dormancy, maybe suppression, maybe superiority, maybe heroism, heroic act of some person. So like that. So symbols help actually in many ways. First, they evoke the concrete reality, and then they also help to help the reader to arrive upon the different meanings that can be associated with the object which has been symbolized, which has been, or an idea which has been symbolized. So this was about the symbols and the imagery. So maybe if you at some point of time get your study material, then perhaps you can go through the case studies which are there in the study material, and then you can associate our discussion how in different pieces of poetry, in different pieces that are taken as case studies for discussion, those have been critically examined. So now we come to the another issue we thought to discuss was the readability. Uh, what is readability? All of us are aware a good composition is that what reads. This we discussed the other day. Mm. Joel is also joining. So a good composition, a good writing is that what reads. A good poetry speaks. A good short story is that which unfolds. So there are a lot of explanations about the good composition, good writing, good creation. So one that is universally accepted factor of good writing is the readability. Uh, First of all, let us understand what is readability. We all know that we discussed just now the dramatization of ideas, how the ideas are put through dramatic images, dramatic forms in the dramas. We also took note of some dramatic voices, dramatic the ideas that have been presented in the short stories or in the fiction. In poetry also, there is a role for the dramatization of ideas because we use various literary devices as to bring about pleasure, better understanding to our sense organs through metaphors, similes, epithets, and also when we talk about the symbols, those are also acting as embellishments when we talk about the poetry. But what is good poetry? What is the role of dramatization? Why do we dramatize the ideas? What is the purpose of dramatizing the ideas? Why there is a dramatization? Why all this fuss about putting an idea, putting a situation in a dramatized form through dialogues, through monologues, and so forth? So the only purpose is that the writing must be interesting, it should be very clear, it should convey what the author has intended to do. So we discussed the dramatization of ideas, using of images and symbols, dramatizing the situation, all that. But if all this is not ending in a smooth, in a flowing, in a lucid composition, it is no use of using all these literary devices, techniques. What should be the end result? End result should be the readability. Readability is sometimes what we do, we think a lot, we put in a lot of efforts to read something. Means our mind is working, our eyes are focused, our intention is engrossed. A lot of efforts are being made to to read. That means to find out something from the composition, from the writing, from the creation. So if so much of effort is to be put in, then what is the purpose of reading? So it is said, what is the use of a book without picture or conversations? What is the use of a book without pictures or conversation? That means if the reading is not giving us pleasure, why should we read? So the reading, the authorial work should create images in the minds of the reader, and through those images, the reader should simply uh, flow with the meaning, with the idea that has been developed, with the situation that was conceived and developed through various phases like opening, climax, ending, and so forth. So, if we sum it up, we can simply say that readability or a reading, smooth or smooth reading, is the writer's ultimate goal. Why do writer writes? What is the purpose of writing? The sole purpose of writing is that it means the creation, the composition, the authorial work should be readable. If there is a short story, if there is a feature, if there is a play, you see, and if it fails to read, that means if it fails to catch the interest of the reader or sustain the interest in it till the end. For example, if we have fiction, we have short story, one begins reading, in a while one gets bored and leave it, that is not a successful writer. So there are two things. One, that the reading, reading means the composition should be able to arouse interest and catch the interest of the reader. And secondly, it should sustain the reader throughout the work till the end. So, if arresting the attention of the reader and sustaining the interest of the reader is not achieved, then perhaps writer's ultimate goal is not achieved. So, readability is a quality or a condition of good authorialship that makes poetry or fiction or drama catching the interest and sustaining the interest of the reader. Then it is not the good piece of literature. What should go into successful? How do we, you know, create interest? I mean, what do we do to create the reader's interest, to arrest the reader's? The word is arresting, but to make the reading interesting to the reader. Uh, it's very important that the beginning, whether it is a drama, whether it is a fictional work, or even if it is a short story, the beginning should be such that it must catch the interest of the person. We know that every person is very busy, engaged, and people do not have much time as to discuss what is one is going to find in this particular reading, or what will be pleasure one would be feeling, what will be joy one would be drawing after this reading. There is no space for all this. So, what to do? How to make uh, reader engrossed in the reading? How to arrest his or her interest? So that means the beginning should be such, or the beginning, if the beginning is such that is very interesting or that is very skillfully crafted, that will make the writing readable. So, beginning is one such uh, aspect of any creation that must be very, very dramatized, dramatic, very unfolding, very catchy, so that it arouses the interest of reader in reading and then keeps the reader engrossed in the piece of literature or the creation. Second issue with the readability, this is very important. Also made a little comment a little while ago. What is that which arouses the interests of the reader? This is ambiguity and suspense. Let us make a distinction between the literary, between the creative literature and non-creative literature. Perhaps uh, this is one such one. This is one a very important characteristic of writing that makes very clear distinction between creative writing and non-creative writing. Ambiguity and suspense. This is a big flaw of writing in non-creative writing. Say, for example, if media language is full of ambiguity and suspense, that is going to fail. If the banking literature is full of suspense and ambiguity, no, that is going to fail. If the officialese or the literature used in the functions of the government, administrative literature, there is no role for ambiguity and suspense. You look for this literature pertaining to sports, pertaining to knowledge literature, science, or any other form of literature which is not creative literature. That means which is not poetry, which is not fiction, or which is not another any other genre of creative literature, for example, memoirs and so forth, where dramatization of ideas is a great achievement, then that literature will fail. But if we talk about the creative literature, ambiguity and suspense are two very important traits. If there is no ambiguity in a poetry, there is no suspense in a story, we feel no, this is very flat writing. So these are two very cardinal principles of readability. These are very two important feature of readability, because uh, uh, if there is no ambiguity in short story, no one would read. Everybody would like to be in suspense, would like to know what is next, what is next, what is next. So till the end, because when a story is told when it is already told, because it unfolds, it goes into retrospection. So all through a short story there is a suspense. If a very clear meaning is conveyed by explanation, then it is no good poetry. The poetry is always left to be understood, interpreted by the reader and find out the meaning. So we talk about the what is ambiguity. Ambiguity is something which is a half truth, which is half truth. Something is made clear, but majority is left unclear. So it becomes a combination of facts and distortion. So a kind of riddling, kind of trapping, is created in the literature by the author, and these are considered to be the essential or cardinal principles of readership as far as creative literature is concerned. As I mentioned, suspense is very important, because if there is no suspense, the reader's interest will not be sustained till the end. It has to be some small whispering must be there, you know, some small suspense about what happened to that old lady, where she is now. She will keep on peeping through different episodes here and there, but will not become very uh, predominantly clear. Perhaps in the end, there will be a situation where her real personality is uh, made clear. So, in creative writing, there is a guessing game. You know, there is a guessing game. Like in courtship, nobody knows what will be the end. Both the partners keep on guessing. There is a honesty, there is a little, conceit, there is a little lie, there is a lot of truth, but not a very clear line. Once there is a marriage, then everything is very clear. It is known, there will be uh, dedication, there will be honesty in the relationship, but that doesn't sustain the interest. What sustains the interest? The courtship. A long, long journey of courtship will be in having a lot of interest of the readers, but when the two gets married, oh, the whole suspense is over, and the reader will say, okay, that is the end of the story. Now I should move ahead with the reading. Uh, now there's another issue of readability. Readability is also to hold the reader's interest. And sometimes what we do, we brings about uh, little episodes, small characters. What are those small characters? If we are talking about, say, uh, talking about mm, a life of a scientist, what will be the small miniature character in it? During uh, the lab sessions, there will be one very beautiful student, a very beautiful character who will be catching the interest of the scientist. So that way, sometimes some stories, uh, peripheral characters are brought so that they uh, they keep on adding little rasa, little taste, little pleasure to the story. Because if one just moves ahead with scientific discussion, practicals in the scientist, in analysis, researches, deep researches, then the interest of the reader is difficult to be maintained. So maybe small children are coming to visit the lab, then there is a small interaction with the uh, small with the scientist. He will be laughing, he will be having a cup of coffee, maybe sharing a chocolate, like that. So there are miniatures, there are small characters. Somebody has called it lusting. So there is an element of lusting. So that means lust is not in the negative sense, but maybe one is bringing about a small cat to the lab. Maybe there is a little girl who is visiting the lab, and then she will be asking very innate, very simple, very childish questions to the scientist, and they will be laughing together. But at the same time, the story or uh, the basic idea will continue to be there, but then these small characters are added. So this is also uh, to make the composition readable, to make it more interesting, to sustain the interest of the reader. So why the interest of the reader should be sustained? Of course, we know that if it is not sustained, the composition, the effort will fail. One final element in the readability, that is the language. Uh, if you look at the language used by Anup Raj Anand, Anita Desai, or Oscar Wilde, or George Orwell in their compositions, in their writings, we know we look at the Arkan Aranas Malgudi days, very simple language that is naturally spoken by the small boys who from the hinterlands. He's understanding the language appropriate to his or her understanding, language appropriate to the social settings of the character, language which is very appropriate to the background of the character is very important. So the style is very important, style of the language. In case there is a situation where a person is sending or meeting someone who has lost some near ones, then the language of condolences is very different from the language which we use in general meeting with one another. So it has to be full of sympathy, full of grief. It has to be a kind of cold language, unmoving language. But on the other hand, if somebody is visiting someone after many years, then naturally there's a warmth in language. So this coldness and a warmth, these are two features. Language is neither cold nor warm. But the selection of words, selection of tone, selection of presentation creates a situation which strikes the chord of grief or chord of joy, chord of happiness, chord of taste or chord of distaste. So it is very important that appropriately language is chosen. If it is so, it will, one, not offend the reader, because after all the reader is also an intelligent person. If the language is appropriate to this situation, the reader will appreciate it. If it is not so, the reader will not go ahead with the reading. So that means the end of the readership. So that cannot be afforded by the author. And finally, what makes good reading? What makes good reading? It is the is the end of the composition, end of the poetic piece, poem, end of the fiction, novel, or any other genre. So usually there are two types of ending. One is closed ending, another one is the open ending. In closed ending, say for example, if it is a science fiction or some other writing which is which has a situation of political and social uh, motivation. That means the situation has arrived from the social or political conditions. Then at the end, at the conclusion, there is very clear message. There is very clear message. Like in the end, this can be said. To end, it is to reiterate that it is necessary for all Indians to work for the unity and safety of the country. Like that. So if that kind of statement is there in the conclusion of composition, that is the closed ending. That means there is no point, there is no scope for discussion, elaboration, or interpretation with the reader. And usually there is no question of morality in such writings. So if there is very specific ending, not allowing the reader to interpret, to guess, or to bring about any other dimension to the understanding, that is closed ending. Uh, but at the same time, there is another kind of ending, that is the open ending. Specifically, reading the poetry, we always, or in some cases, in the storytelling also, we have seen that a situation is left, and the uh, then the crow just flew away. No one knows where it went. No one knows where it went. No. Then the crows finally flew away to where it is not known. If that kind of statement is there, it means one can imagine it went to the next house, it went to the forest. Similarly, the so and so character simply vanished in the thin air. If we talk about the ghost stories, we are left with lot of options where the character finally went, what happened, whether it survived or it got killed or it simply vanished. So when there are a lot of scope for interpretation, that is the open ending. So open ending is rather more preferred in the creative literature because the reader is left to guess, to ponder over the theme and bring about his own creative mind in process to find out the meaning. So it is a kind of invitation to the reader by the author to join in the process of writing. So which is a great treat for the reader. So we see that there are a number of factors that makes good reading, that makes uh, uh, that provides appropriate use of language, that provides a good ending to the creation, to the composition, that definitely arrests the attention of the reader as well as sustain the interest till the end. So very importantly, there should be very sound beginning. There should be very clever use of ambiguity and suspense, as we saw. And I very categorically discussed the traits of creative literature, non-creative literature. Ambiguity and suspense are very important properties of creative literature, whereas in non-creative literature, these are treated to be flaw, but these are embellishments of the creative literature. And then there is a very intelligent end to the creation, whether it is poem or it is short story or it is a novella or it is something else, it's novel. If the conclusion is such that allows the reader to join and investigate what happened to the character, left to guess, but at times it doesn't happen with the science fiction, it doesn't happen with the with certain other, uh, like if it is a fiction about fictionalization of the themes based on the computers. But then a scope can be left to the reader to guess more innovative aspects of the more ripple creator aspects of the computers. It can be provided in the composition. So simply putting it in the ordinary words, that the end is little complex, little unclear, allowing the reader to join in investigating the final conclusion of the story or the poem or the novel. That is also one tool, one good feature of the writing to sustain the interest of the reader. So, good reading means that which reads, what it reads, sound beginning, suspense, and ambiguity, then good and good end to it, and also the dramatization of ideas, whether it is poem, whether it is short story, or it is novel. So all this works towards the good reading, which is arresting the interest of the readers as well as allowing the readers to join to find out more options in the understanding. So with that, we come to the end of this particular blog where we discussed the situation, the dialogue and monologues, as I mentioned. Dialogues and monologues are primarily to discuss the dramatization of ideas, which are presented either through the dialogue, where two or more people participate in the in taking the plot and taking the situation ahead and put the views in a dramatized tone with the very appropriate use of language. So here I will pause my presentation, my discussion, and I would like uh, to ask you to join for the questions if there are any for 2-3 minutes more that we have with us. Somebody would like to share some ideas? Learners, would someone of would like to discuss anything? So if it is not so, I would request RC, then we will wind up this session. Thank you, thank you. I'm fine. Okay, okay, okay. Welcome, welcome to the session. Today we discussed 4 topics. We discussed the situation. We discussed the dialogues and monologues. We discussed the imagery and symbol, and towards the end we discussed the readability. So all these are there in the block 3 of the general principles of writing. That the title of the course 1, DCE01, which we are discussing at present. So this was the third block. So there were 4 units, and this was the third block of the DCE1, General Principles of Writing. So if no other question is coming, I will say have a very good day. We'll meet tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you all. So I take leave. थैंक यू आरसी चंडीगढ़. तेजपाल जी बहुत बहुत आभार आपका. धन्यवाद. थैंक यू वेरी मच. हैव ए वेरी गुड डे.